Intro chat with Merrill's live, digging deep where techs thrive. From the latest hacks to cool updates, join the ride, don't be late.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Entra Chat. Today we are going to talk about a really interesting topic about migrating to the cloud and decommissioning your Active Directory. And I have two folks who are joining me today. I have Tobias from Via Era. They're based in Germany, but also having many offices in Europe. And Tobias is the leading the IT department there, and they've done this awesome successful migration. So we want to learn all of that from them. And I also have one of my colleagues from work at Microsoft, Yusuke from Japan. Yusuke is actually working on helping lots of customers, repeat the same sort of success. And we are trying to make it much more easier for Microsoft customers to move to the cloud. And so we are just going to, have a really interesting discussion on how it was achieved, all the lessons they learned along the way, and what you can learn too. Cool. Tobias, you want to share anything more
Yeah,
about
let me
yourself?
quickly introduce myself. My name is Tobias Binkert. I'm leading the IT department, as Meryl mentioned, at Via Era. Via Era belongs to a big media corporation in Germany, to RTI Group and to Bertelsmann. My personal journey in IT started very early on. My father was an IT manager and was kind of introducing me to all the IT stuff. So I learned how to set up networks and mess with computer hardware and systems early on. Big fast forward, my professional career started in IT support at Amazon and at Audible, and then kind of slowly grew into more like a network SME, and later on into a more strategic leadership role. And that's basically also what I'm doing right now. I'm leading the IT department at Via Era, and yeah, defining where we're going in the future. And in the past, that was the cloud.
Nice, awesome. And Yusuke,
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Yusuke, product manager at Microsoft. I've been working with identity-related technology for about 10 years, and I'm recently leading some of initiatives to help customer migrate from on-prem AD to cloud-based environment, Entra ID, at my organization in Microsoft. So that's why I'm here, and thanks for inviting me to the call, Meryl, today, and I look forward to your story, Tobias.
yes, yeah, it's a pleasure. We are doing, a three-person on IntroChat, so for the first time. So it's going to be very interesting and spanning three different time zones. I always forget to mention, so we have Japan, Melbourne in Australia, and from Germany as well. So it's always cool to hear all these, the global stories. Cool. So let's kick things off. What was the thing that motivated Via Era to look at, decommissioning on-prem AD and sort of make that huge jump to move to the cloud? That's one story that we are really interested in, learning the why behind all this.
Yeah, Via Era is part of a big corporation, as mentioned. And as it is sometimes with big corporations, there's these corporation-wide initiatives. And one of these initiatives was a massive security initiative over all business units within Bertelsmann to basically strengthen overall security. It was like a very widespread project. So it really went from securing domains to securing end user devices. But there was one significant topic in there, which was basically Active Directory hardening, having a proper segregation of duties with Active Directory, having a proper backup, and a lot of different things, also like on our domain controllers. At that time, we were running a hybrid AD, so we already had some Entra involved, but mostly still local Active Directory. And we are basically looking at how we can achieve these security goalposts. We're a fairly small company within this whole corporation. So at that time, we had around 250 employees. And given that our IT team also wasn't, yes, you can imagine we were like 50 people in IT. We were We were 5 people at the time, I think. And we're looking into how we can achieve this. And very early on, we realized that if we actually really deep dive into hardening both Entra ID and local Active Directory, that would be kind of way too much for us to do and also very expensive. And our goal as a company is always to run on a lean, cost-effective um, environment. So we're looking at the entire setup, and eventually, I mean, we're like a young, hip, agile company, and we're basically asking ourselves, okay, like, do we actually still need local Active Directory? Is there a way of us to run only in the cloud and basically just cut off all the ties that we have to local infrastructure and actual servers?
Right.
And this is how we ended up questioning the status quo and looking into the direction of migrating.
Nice. So it's interesting. It was more security that triggered this whole journey for you, right? Because yeah, I mean, with on-prem AD, that's one of the huge challenges people have to basically secure, and a lot of compromises we see obviously always start on-prem and then you pivot to the cloud from there.
Yeah, so security must be a very good reason for IT to start, those migration projects. But I have follow-up question on that. How, on the other hand, there are business unit, who manage the application and who are usually satisfied with the current setup of AD, right? So how did you negotiate with those people who are managing existing application, working on AD, arguing it's working, why change it? Type of people inside your organization.
That is a very good point. I think we had a big advantage here because it was basically a top-down approach. So we had the corporate leadership that was pushing corporate goals, and we had to comply with them one way or the other. So getting business stakeholders on our side was fairly easy because it was their interest that we get to that point. With the existent tools that were relying on Active Directory, we were trying to sell benefits that we eventually would have with a full cloud environment. So basically early adopting like new technologies that Microsoft is providing, and or even like fixing other current pain points that we had with this setup. Like we had just as an example, we had a one-directional sync for our local Active Directory into the cloud, which caused some problems when people wanted to change passwords. For example, they changed the cloud password, but that didn't reflect back to the local Active Directory. They had to contact IT. That was a bit of a pain point. A lot of these things. So basically, we try to wrap it into a very nice package to sell to people and be like, hey, okay, this is going to be painful for now. We're going to find a workaround, but eventually you will have all these benefits in the long run. And this will actually be more like a business enabler rather than restricting them.
Yeah, the password thing is the one that I've heard before. This organization had outsourced, their help desk to a company, and the way they were paying them was based on the number of support calls they got, right? And when someone changed their password, when they changed it on-prem, there's this delay, right? Whether when you change it in the cloud or on-prem, there's this like a small delay. So when people change the password, they immediately try it on-prem, and it doesn't work, and then they call help desk, right? By the time they call, it's already fixed, but they don't know. But they made the call, and then you have this whole drama happening, and we were trying to find out, how much you can reduce it. But it's a sync, right? So it's always going to be there is that short delay for that to go through. So
Totally. We also had like issues, for example, sometimes with exactly the thing that you're mentioning, Meryl. We had like every half an hour we sync the status. And I remember like a story from our help desk where we had like a very short-term onboardings, for example. And I know in an ideal world, short-term onboardings are like not happening because everything is communicated weeks in advance, but they're still happening. And so we had like HR being like, hey, we have somebody here right now. We forgot to communicate that they're starting. We need the account right now. And if we then set up the local account until it's synced into the cloud, there was kind of like, it could be, if you're lucky, 1 minute, 2 minutes, could be up to 30 minutes. And then we'd still have to assign like the groups, etc. And they had to sync and like, yeah. So having a full Entra ID setup is really benefit when it comes to this because you have this immediate impact that you can basically make by creating an account directly there.
yeah, a lot less moving parts.
Yeah, because Merrill, talking about the ROI and cost impact you made. How did you address migration cost ROI discussion with your management? It's brought up every time I talk with my customer about how should I, convince my CFO to go toward the SM project because it's not the revenue generator to remove the AD, right? So, what was your logic to proceed that conversation with your management?
It's true. So from our side, I think I need to give you some more insight into how our Active Directory actually was run. So our local Active Directory was running on VMs in Azure. We had a big office move in 2020 and decided it would be easier to basically not like move the physical servers, but maybe just have them all the time available as like a VM. So we had an active cost by paying for these VMs to run. Local servers at that time were already VMs. We had a VM for an Exchange server. We had a VM for we had OctaSync with the local Active Directory. We had a privileged access workstation and so on. So there were multiple like VMs that we're actively paying and that were actually cost. We also already had Entra ID that we synced into. So by migrating, we could actually save the costs that we were paying for the VMs because you could shut down basically the entire VM infrastructure, like what I just mentioned, the domain controllers, the Exchange servers, the privileged access workstations, the syncing server, we could also shut down. And these were actually cost savings. And on our side, the cost savings ended up 70% of our infrastructure costs. So we actually saved a significant amount of money by being Entra only. And the only cost that we had were basically was the manpower to migrate everything and to find a solution to migrate. But otherwise, it was a pure ROI gain, actually.
Right. Nice. Nice. And how, like, your infrastructure, right, on-prem AD, do you know when it was set up? Like, just to understand, because over time is when all the complexity comes, right? How old was your AD roughly in its lifetime?
So we're a very young company. I think we were founded somewhat around 2012.
Right.
And we underwent a lot of changes. Like we got bought by the RTL group,
Right.
and with that, there were always a lot of change. Like I think, like the more corporate we went, the more Microsoft we used. Actually,
Yes.
as Entra was one of the things that came with that takeover. The overall AD was sometime from like in the 2010s. And then Entra joined like basically in 2019, and then we went full cloud in 2023.
Right. So it's like 14, uh, 10 years of, accumulating different various apps and things that you added. Yeah. So you mentioned, the number of users you had and all of that. So you were like all the devices were all like domain joined, and you said they were partly hybrid joined as well. Were you like an Intune based setup, or do you have third party MDM?
Yeah, we use Intune. We moved to Intune actually. Also like with the change that we had, as soon as we had Entra ID. We also used Intune for both Windows and Mac devices. Um, we are mostly, at that point, we were mostly Windows devices at the company. So, and all of these were workgroup joined indeed. Yeah, they were basically all bound to our local Active Directory,
Right. Nice. Nice.
which actually turned out to be quite a task to migrate.
Yes. Yeah. We'll dive into that. So usually with migration, Yusuke, what are the different parts, like high level when you talk of migration to
Yeah,
Entra? You have
yeah, we usually define three pillars of the migration: application, user and groups, and the devices.
right. So I think what we'll do is we'll break down each one and see how you went through with each of those, right? So we can make sure we cover all the parts. Let's start with devices because we were talking about that already. What was your approach with the devices and working your way through. I guess the first question would be, what did you start off first? Like, was there an order you picked, or did you have like things happening in parallel um, when you did this?
So the entire project was a bit of a pilot project, also for the entire group that we are as a part of, because a lot of companies were struggling with this Active Directory hardening and basically cost allocation when it came to that. So we kicked this off as like kind of a guess in the wild, more or less, and we were like, okay, like we just migrate as much as we possibly can migrate. We started off basically making a list of all the dependencies and working through that. But we knew at that point that everything we already could migrate would be a benefit. Even if we end up with one or two local servers, we can still shut down one or the other. So we basically went with a very agile way of like just picking what works and just try to get through. Yeah, also when it came to devices, we had two main end user devices, and these were like macOS based devices and Windows. macOS was fairly easy because they're not bound to our Active Directory. We basically just installed company portal on the end user devices, let them install, and all the
Right.
profiles installed.
That was more
Um,
greenfield, right? Because you didn't have another MDM on it before, and so you just sort of enrolled. Or if you did Intune, they were already cloud joined
exactly,
as such, right? Because they were not domain joined
exactly.
before. Yeah.
Yeah, the main problem was like Windows-based devices because they all were in a work group. Um, and that actually, like reflecting, that was the biggest pain point in the end because we kind of tried to figure out how we can keep an operational status in the company while
Right.
removing all the devices from work groups, and we didn't find a way to do that smoothly, sort of like that, like just straightforward. Main issue is that as soon as we would have removed it from the work group, we'd need to have like a local admin always being like able to log in and find it again. And that would always end up in pain points. We tried to do it via scripts, we weren't able to do it with a script. We did a bit the same thing as we did with our local Active Directory. We tried to take a step back and being like, okay, like what can we do that right now it will cost a lot of effort, but in the long term will be like the best possible gain for us. So we started handing out new devices that were Autopilot joined. So we basically gradually moved all devices into Microsoft Autopilot, which gives us full flexibility going forward, especially since VIA Era has a lot of international offices, but the entire IT organization is based in Berlin. That gives the possibility to basically just send the devices directly to end users. Them logging in on a new device with a cloud-only identity, and then moving all the files over, sending back the old device to us. We get that autopilot ready, send it out again, and therefore slowly but surely replaced all Windows devices to autopilot joined, which was a pain point. Also, we had to communicate it basically gradually that
Yeah, there's a
it will
lot
take
of
time.
manpower and comms, and because you are sort of a disruption for the person, for the user, right? If the laptop is
Exactly.
working fine and now they need to do some work to swap laptops and the whole thing with moving. But I think this is isn't that it the only supported way today as well, Yusuke? Like, I don't think you can take an existing hybrid join device and swap it over. I know there are various third-party tools that I've seen and heard people using, and quite successfully as well. But I think from like the official supported.
From Microsoft, we don't provide any way to seamlessly migrate hybrid devices to the cloud join. So our baseline strategy we're proposing is to have newer device joined to Entra. And then,
Yeah.
over time, all device will come to Entra.
Correct, yeah, because the devices have a lease period anyway, right?
Yeah.
So you take sort of the longer view, and I mean, I'm working in some enterprises that are doing exactly that. They have this new cloud native, cloud join devices, and when the lease finishes, the person gets a new device that's autopilot, and then they just slowly. So they are not doing it as like a standalone project. It's just running. They've set up the whole cloud native thing, and as people replace, so over the period of the 3-year life cycle or whatever of the devices, they just get the new device in, which it's a slow burn, right? But it's the most cleanest, right? Because when you do a hybrid and you swap things and all, there is a risk you carry, but you can't be like, it has its pros and cons, right? You can't finish the project in like 6 months or a year in in a hurry.
Yeah, while it takes time, all all organizations need to start, cloud-based device management, implementation immediately from today, right? So that is how we,
Yeah, that's
propose customer to start.
thing. Correct, right? Yeah, at least like every org should have a pilot where project, right? Where at least the IT team is trialing and setting it up, and they have all of this new way working, so that it makes it easier to swap over. And the earlier you start the project, the earlier you can be done with that flow. Right? Cool.
Also,
So
actually, on our end, this was one of the biggest game changers going forward. Also from an effectivity standpoint, like as mentioned, we have satellite offices in, for example, Amsterdam, in Milan, in Paris, in Stockholm, and with the entire IT organization being based in Berlin, like our workflow in the past was we order a device, we set it up with a deployment server that we also had back then. We prepare everything, we then send it out again via mail to, let's say, Stockholm, and that takes time. And that's kind of a tedious process. And you know how it is with couriers. Sometimes the device gets lost, sometimes it gets damaged on the way. And it was everything but effective. And now with Autopilot, we just order the device directly to the location where it has to be. Like with remote working, it's super easy. We just order the device brand new to like the end user. The end user has a great experience because they have this feeling of they get a brand new laptop.
correct.
They just unpack it. It hasn't been through like 50 different hands before.
Yeah.
And everything just installs seamlessly, automatically via Intune, via the scripts we set up, via the application we assigned. And like the feedback we hear from the end users is like phenomenal. Like they're really happy about that. And for us as an IT organization, that's also a win because we're saving so much time by just ordering devices directly to end users and not having to send it manually.
Exactly. It'll feel very personal to them, right? Like it's not been through so many people, as you said. And yeah, I just realized it, right? Like it goes through so many hands. You open the parcel and like you do all of that. I mean, that's the experience I had when I joined Microsoft even 5 years ago. Just the retail store would just ship the device to me, and I would just open it brand new from the packaging, get that fresh, the new box. Opening experience, and then just connect to Wi-Fi, and it would just set up everything. So yeah, that's a really neat, delightful experience.
And
Another
also free up a lot of dependencies actually. Like when it comes to like, for example, time of the IT team, they spend with setting up the device, preparing everything, double checking everything. Um, like we sped up so much time that we can then like spend on like more important projects because effectively ordering a laptop took us a minute and then that was it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, another thing I want to ask about the device is that, because end user experience has changed from having hybrid devices to the cloud devices. Was there any feedback you got from the end user after giving them a cloud-based PC?
Not really, actually. We haven't heard any, like, we didn't have any pain points when it came with the cloud-based PC. In fact, I mean, despite having Autopilot, which I guess is mostly from an operational standpoint interesting, we also introduced Windows Hello for Business right away. There was a possibility then with having Autopilot devices and the Entra ID only accounts, and that actually got a lot of good feedback because it's so much more seamless to log in, use your fingerprint, using your face recognition, and end users really like that actually about this whole project. Another thing that also now eventually worked was the password change. So that was also like a very good thing.
Right.
changing passwords now was like seamlessly. You could like go to password reset.microsoft online and just like reset the password, and it actually was immediately effective everywhere. So this was a game changer. And so overall, the feedback that we got was very, very positive.
And you did Hello for Business, or even if they change the password, they didn't need to keep, re-signing into the laptop, because if it's using passwordless, you don't like none of your sessions get impacted when you're using Hello for Business. So nice. How about the server? So when we talk about devices, we spoke about the workstations and the laptops, and you mentioned you had servers. Were there anything outside of that? What about any application servers, or other file servers and other things that uh, did you have to contend with any of that?
So we did have some servers that were or like services as well that were hosting on servers that were impacted by this change. And like for example, like I remember some services relying on radios. That was an issue for us since that wasn't fully supported from Entra. So that was primarily our VPN. And there we were lucky because we could change the dependency from radios to actually using Microsoft Single Sign-On, including MFA. So that actually was a win for us as well because we had like a more secure way of logging in there, and we could just migrate that to Entra. We had a physical access management system that also was using radios to sync users from a specific group in on our local AD. And unfortunately, that one wasn't really supportive for Entra and still isn't. So we we just decided we have a manual process. We turned off the sync, we kept the existing users. And I remember that was also one of the things that were like a bit of a pain point with like short term, like for example, new hires and so on, when you had to hand out like an RFID chip for the new person, and we just like put them into a group that takes 30 minutes to sync. You can't prepare the RFID chip, and they're standing there waiting for the new key. So we also sold that basically as a win to the affected departments, and being like, hey, from now on, you can create the user yourself, and it's and it works directly. You don't have to wait for like anything to sync. Those were two services that were definitely impacted. We had some other servers directly as well. Especially like we had one server that we used for like running heavy Power BI calculations on, and this one we migrate or like we joined Entra ID directly via Windows.
Cool. Were there any other scenarios that were blocked that you couldn't bring across?
One of the things we stumbled early upon on was like printing as well. We used to have a print server.
Yeah.
And we're like by now, like now we actually just, I think last month we just moved over to Universal Print. So also an Azure service. But before that, we just decided, okay, like first of all, post-COVID, most people were working from home anyway. So like who's still printing in the office? And then for those who are still printing in the office, we just said, okay, map the printer directly via IP for the time being. We decided that like like since we had a big business interest to make this change, this is a pain point we can accept.
Right. But then now you fixed it, right, with the universal print.
Exactly. Now it's easier than ever with universal print, and like people can just like sign in directly into the application with their Entra only identity, and that's it. But generally, I think, as you mentioned, like since we were a fairly young company and we didn't have a lot of legacy stuff that we were like carrying with us, it really allowed us to like tackle this whole thing quite flexible. And most of the things weren't running for that long that people were really relying on like the services that weren't compatible. So we could just be like, okay, we take this from you, but therefore you'll get like these 5 new great things, and it was good enough.
Did you how do you all do Wi-Fi in the offices? Did that cause any issues? The authentication into Wi-Fi and
No, we do that profile based, but since we wrote out the profile directly via Intune, that was
so you
not an
already
issue.
set up, right? You didn't your Wi-Fi infrastructure itself was the newer one, so it could use
Yes.
the profile based on, right?
like generally, like with this Office move we had in 2020, we really tried to get rid of everything legacy and everything that would kind of like keep us from implementing like the newest technologies. So we tried to like since we had to kind of get new Wi-Fi satellites anyway, we were like, okay, we just like exchange the
Yes.
system for one that is like future-proof and makes it as easy as possible for us to actually manage it. And at that time we were using Intune, so like that was a compatibility we really looked for.
Right. And I think that's one of the overall story here, right? If you're planning to move off AD at some point, maybe in the next 5, 10 years, is to start replacing. And when you get the new technologies, make sure that they are, compliant with using modern authentication and this profile, like, for Wi-Fi and so on, instead of relying on Radius and, the old legacy things where you can't do strong MFA and better security and so on, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like this is really like also, I mean, from the beginning, we didn't know whether we could actually pull it off. There was always the possibility that we would hit like a blocker that we couldn't get around, and we actually planned for it. Like we were planning for failure, and we're very happy that we didn't hit it. Um, but yeah, this is always a risk you have. But everything that you can migrate is a win. I mean, everything that you don't have to rely on your local infrastructure on, that you have always available in the cloud, being able to secure it with MFA, being able to roll out a single sign-on for services, like all these things like make an impact to the end user, but also like to the effectivity of the IT team overall. So from our side, we try to go basically gain by gain, and but like seeing if we can reach the overall goal. And yeah, in our case, we were lucky enough to be in a situation where we could replace dependencies. But even if you wouldn't have, it would have been a win nonetheless. Like even if we would have only got rid of 3 servers, that already would be been like an ROI gain and a positive user impact.
Nice.
So I have a question on the account lifecycle management aspect of the question. So if I assume it right, you are using Entra Connect Sync to make your account sync to the cloud uh, from the AD, and how did you migrate it to the cloud, pure cloud, account? What is the procedure, and what was the challenge you faced, and how you manage cloud account nowadays? Especially for the user account, group account on the cloud. How do you like manage those life cycle of those objects?
So you're right. We had this local AD sync, one directional to Entra in the first place. What we did in order to be able to make the accounts cloud only was we basically we wrote a script to disable the account locally. We communicated downtime to the end user. Then we waited for the disabling flag to sync to cloud, and then only enabled them in the cloud again. And since it was a one-directional sync, it didn't sync back to the Active Directory, and eventually we ended up with an active user in the cloud and a disabled user in Active Directory. We told users to log out and back in again, and then they were logged in with their cloud-only identity. We had some other dependencies locally, like on our Exchange server, for example, we had room mailboxes, we had shared mailboxes. We migrated all those to being purely in Exchange Online. Yeah, this is basically how we did the overall change. And that was the last thing we obviously did, because like the deactivating the users and reactivating them again was dependent on like them using Autopilot ready devices, like only using their cloud identities for all the services. Otherwise, we obviously would have locked them out of applications and workflows as well. Now we It's actually so the whole Entra ID we're using is a kind of an interesting setup. It's like we have multiple administrative units in the Entra ID because it's a group-owned Entra ID. So we have multiple like divisions basically that are set up separately. And right now, in order to like manage lifecycle and create the user, we're using a Graph API and a script to create the user, because obviously out of security reasons, we can't give everybody working in every division full access to like a multi-divisional Entra. So we are using a Graph API to create the users. And yeah, upon offboarding, we disable the users, stripe off the licenses, and after 60 days or so, we delete them.
So in user experience, there may be a little bit of change because users have been inputting their SAM account name when they log into the PC. Now they need to log in with the cloud account. How was the reaction? Was there any, support case call increase by the user switch? What's the impact?
So since we had like this, since we kind of pushed this entire change of laptops, we were really hands-on when it came to this. So we really had like support team members going even to international sites with laptops in their backpack and replaced one with the other and helping every user with the login, with transferring the files. Again, coming back to the whole like cost-effective lean environment, we didn't want to just like order 250 new laptops because what we're supposed to do with the remaining ones. So we got like I think like 20, replaced the first 20 devices, took those devices back, made them autopilot ready, then replaced the next 20, and so on and so on and so on.
That's
And given
interesting, like a
that we had like a
iterational
local
process, right?
exactly, but it was very cost effective.
Yes.
And given that we had a local person on site, we had like hands-on support right away and kind of could guide them through all the steps, all the upcoming questions. And of course, there were questions like setting up Windows Hello for Business was new for the end users. Um, Also, just like having the new experience with a completely cloud-only account on the end user device was a change. But since we had somebody there, we could cover basically these like upcoming questions right away. I would assume if you do that gradually, like now, if we provide a device that is like let's say we have an onboarding and we provide an autopilot device to somebody who has not worked with that before, we just send like a onboarding instruction handout to the hiring manager, and it basically guides them through, and they send it then to the person on their first day, and it's like, okay, connect it to Wi-Fi, log in with your temporary password, change the password, and off you go.
Right. One common thing I get when people move to the cloud join PCs is this whole password reminder. There's a pop-up that used to come when your domain join that tells you, hey, it's going to change in, a week and, prompts them. And you don't have that in cloud join devices. Did any of your users raise that, saying,
No,
hey, I'm getting
actually not.
So it's
I think it's
usually
one of the
helpless
typical
to,
things. As
yeah,
long as it's not a pain point, nobody's really flagging it.
right,
So,
yeah,
and actually, at that point, like we haven't heard any pain points when it comes to the
right.
entire change, and we only had positives, and basically, yeah, that everything works smoother and is easier for the end user.
Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah, some help desk teams I know, like they're very like fixated on all these experiences, and they're like, "Oh, CloudJoin doesn't have this, and what will my users do? They'll, not know when to change their password." I mean, my answer for that is like, if you're moving to Hello for Business, why even do password changes, right? Like at Microsoft, I use the same password I did 5 years ago. Microsoft got rid of password changes altogether because we use Entra ID protection and other things to mitigate when there are leaked credentials. So, I mean, that's my first answer always for this. Like, why even forcing password changes? It's an opportunity to, as you do this new change and, getting a new device and so on, it's good to think of some of those as well and try to reduce that pain that comes
yeah.
with.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, no, the guidance on like password changed. Like, it's not to change it like every
Exactly.
6 months or so anymore,
Correct.
because you just end up with an easier and easier password every single time because you have to remember it.
Yeah.
And like you can't have like one that's super secure and MFA forever because you have to constantly change it. So yeah, that basically is like counterproductive with password complexity. And this is also why we changed our Intune policies to not force the password change. We just like have like basically complexity requirements. We have the conditional access that MFA is required for everything using Microsoft Authenticator. And that is, yeah. Actually, like coming to passwords, that was also one of the really big advantages that we have now. or is one of the big advantages that we have now. Since we're now cloud only, implementing single sign-on is super easy and super straightforward. And we basically by now have all our main applications directly using single sign-on with MFA. And that also had like a really, really good user impact, because like people are just tired of getting like constant SMS from different services with like an MFA, or like you have
Yeah.
different like accounts in your apps. Like now you can just sign up once. And with Windows Hello for Business, that's like basically you sign into your device and you have access to all the apps. Uh, by now, we were also able to roll out platform single sign-on for macOS devices. So we kind of are replicating this user feeling on macOS devices
macOS.
too.
Yeah.
And so like this is like, for us, this entire change was a real business enabler, since we are now able to adopt like all the new things that are coming out. We can test it right away, and we don't have to see, okay, what are the dependencies on local Active Directory? Is this kind of breaking any existing service? We know we're Entra ID only. This feature has been made for Entra ID, so you can test it right away.
Nice. When you did the apps, as you moved, did you have things that were using like, robot accounts or user accounts in AD for various, automated things and so on? Did you have any issues with those when you're trying to shut them down?
We had some service accounts, but for all of them, we had like we could replicate them in the cloud, and that was fine for us. There wasn't, I remember like recently there was a change with I think printing and the authentication for like our scanning account. It was basically scan to email. Um, but we were able to change everything directly with Graph. So yeah,
Right.
that was okay for us.
In terms of the application access management for your end users, how today after migration, how do you manage, access grant to the end users? Like you did in the AD, it was ACL, like account control list, right? So in the cloud, how do you do that?
I mean, right now, what we do is like we normally use user groups that are basically linked to like a SCIM protocol, ideally, that would give direct access. What we also implemented like shortly after was a privileged access management. So we actually could conduct surveys if the tool is still used, and be like, hey, if the person doesn't get back to us, they might don't use it anymore. So we can then stripe off the licenses and basically manage the application assignment like effectively, because this is also like one of the things that was always kind of a blind spot, like for us as an IT department. Like people are very good with requesting licenses, especially to costly products, like for example the Adobe Suite or something like that. But they're not as keen as telling you that they don't want it anymore, they don't use it anymore.
Yeah.
So now having like an Entra feature like, or Azure feature like privileged access management is really, really helpful.
Kind of identity governance kind of products you're trying to start using. Good to know that.
Exactly.
Did you have to do anything with special with groups? Any changes as you moved across from on-prem AD to M365 when it came to the actual groups and managing groups? Or you
And
did the same thing as a syncing and just disabling and turning it off?
I think our advantage there was that we already had a hybrid setup. We already had lots of groups, and we already tried to like have the groups mostly Entra based when doing this whole migration. We had some, as like the before mentioned, the access management system, like the physical one that we had in the office that was using Radius. Those we changed, but all the other groups were already like purely cloud based.
So, in terms of migration, were there any other questions, Yusuke, that we missed?
No more technical question we have. The overall cloud journey question here. It's not non-technical, but
Yeah.
was there any security or availability concern raised internally when you decided to go full cloud? Because we learned you have full cloud strategy overall, right?
Yeah.
But if you define that strategy, was there any internal discussion you can talk about?
I mean, yes, there were internal discussions I can talk about. I mean, there was one main concern that we had that was like, okay, but what if Entra is offline? Like, what are we doing if Entra was offline? But the main argument was like, hey, if Entra is offline, I know that like Microsoft has like a big interest in getting it back online as soon as possible. If our on-prem goes offline, we have 5 people and they have weekends. The possible downtime and the possible risk you have there is higher than if it's Entra only. Same thing, even like, I mean, if it's a cloud VM, if there's any problem with a cloud VM and it's 2 a.m., there's no one's gonna fix that right immediately. That was the main concern that we had from stakeholders. Apart from that, the overall security, I would say right now is significantly better than before, because what you just get rid of is like all these servers that you have to continuously update. You have to be aware of like security updates, security gaps that you might have to kind of look into. But if you just like deprecate all the servers,
Yeah.
there's like significantly
Yeah.
less
It's
to
a whole,
monitor.
whole class of pen testing and like all of that's just completely out the window, right? Because you don't have any servers that can be targeted.
Yeah, we had like this entire the entire security budget also like was a bit freed up because we have a security operations center and we use Splunk to monitor all the logs. And obviously, the more servers you have, the more logs you have. The more servers you deprecate, the least logs you have. And so the log ingestion just like went dramatically down. And that also got us like I think 40% of like security costs we freed up by having less logs to monitor. Yeah, like overall, like the security right now is the best it's ever been for us.
And if you do have VMs, like the one you told about, you have them in the cloud and then you do an Azure login to get the single sign-on experience.
Exactly. And we
What
have
about
my
GPOs? And that was one question I've seen people ask, like you would usually use GPOs and group policy to push config and other things into Windows servers, which you don't really get like a direct correlation in the cloud. Did you run across any of those issues?
I mean, we joined the remaining servers to Entra. And then we worked with Intune in order to like basically push administrative templates. The same things we also did for like end user devices. Basically, we pushed all those directly on the server and it secured it by doing that. Um, yeah, that was possible for all the GPOs that we had. But again, that also probably comes back to us having like cloud only servers anyway, that we didn't have any physical on site. We had like a VM that was already in Azure.
How about the cloud, help desk teams and others? Do you really have to invest a lot there, or like, I mean, obviously the cloud native join, it's different types of issues that they might see compared to hybrid join.
It's true. I think the key here was really doing it gradually, having like one service at a time and having a lot of documentation. Because like all this documentation then rolled out like gradually, like was made it easy to follow. And I think it also was key for like end users that like one tool at a time was migrated. So they actually had the time to adapt to the change before like everything hitting all at once. I feel like if we would have done the change like within like let's say like within like 1 month, that would have been too drastic of a change for most people, and that would have caused like a lot of like tickets, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns. But since it was like the slow slide into like a cloud only identity, um, we were really able to adapt with the time, and it made it more like eventually it was a logical conclusion to basically sum up the project to have everything there. And that also was our massive benefit when it came to communicating, to basically like we started off with the first thing that changed that maybe was a pain point for end users. I don't know, but I could foresee that maybe some people are like, why are we changing things?
Yeah.
But once we did more and more, and like it's the same thing with single sign-on. The first tool is maybe a bit weird that log in with your Microsoft. You have to remember that you have to use your Microsoft account. But as soon as you have all of them there, it's like the logical thing to do. It's like, what do you need? What do you need? You only have one password. You only have one account, and then it's the biggest win you can potentially like sell to like end users. So this was really the most important like journey for us here, that we kind of took it with time and step by step.
So your next journey, like with a completion of AD migration, so it made various tasks easier. And what identity-related initiative do you plan to undertake moving forward after the AD
I
migration
mean,
completion?
yeah, I mean, you're right. Like now everything is like really efficient, streamlined, and easy almost to manage with being Entra ID only. Going forward, identity-wise, I don't think we have anything that we really pursue at this time. From our side right now, it's more like the company that Era is continuously growing. We just had like recent acquisitions. So right now is basically getting other companies into the same identity management as we are doing and basically working on like migrations, but keep the operative level that we have by adding additional users.
And you're a group of companies, right? Like, are you planning on taking it to the other companies in the group?
So the group overall, like we're part of a group. We had this big project as a pilot within the group. I and actually we're the first part of the group that was able to achieve this overarching goal. We're the first team that was able to do this, and right now I think it was really like we really benefited from being the guinea pigs in that regard.
Yes.
The group really benefited from now having a blueprint, and I know that multiple other members of the group are already looking into this and like seeing possibility, like looking at possibilities, in order to do that. So I think yes, totally, this is something that will be rolled out further, especially also looking at the ROI gain. I mean, like again, like this is basically what makes stakeholders happy in the end,
Yes.
and
Right.
our CFO is very happy about it.
Yeah. If you could go back and like, based on what you've learned already, is there something you would change in how you did it? Like, based on what you already know so far, which would have, reduced your time or, avoided you making some mistake?
I think it's a very good question. Um, Overall, obviously, since we got out successful, I wouldn't change anything.
Right.
But what we could have improved is like communicate the big goal further on. I was not particularly sure. Again, I really planned for failure. I was
Right.
sure that we'll hit a roadblock at one point.
Right.
And we didn't really communicate that the overall goal will be achieved by the date, not the date X. But now knowing that it works, I would have done that early on and being like, okay, this is a massive success story. This is how it's going to work. But as usual with success stories, you never know before. So this is something now in hindsight I would change. Apart from that, I think honestly, like our approach of taking it like step by step and basically taking it a win at a time. And as you mentioned as well, like just starting with it and seeing how things change was the best approach we possibly could have had. Because like even if we would have hit the famous roadblock, by then we already like made things more efficient. We made things like more cost effective. We made it easier for IT people to manage. We made it easier for end users to use. And if we would have ended up with some domain controllers, then so be it. But luckily we didn't.
So, Tobias, you as an IT leader of the pioneer company of the AD minimization, like AD migration, could you give an advice to the people who wants to go to the cloud from now, or the other organizational
Start.
IT people?
Start. I think honestly, there's so many possible wins to do here. Um, like if I would have started again, I would have started the same way. I would have made a list of dependencies. What do we need the local Active Directory for? Are any of these non-negotiables? If there's non-negotiables and we could move that, I would start right away. If there are non-negotiables, like a local finance application or something like that, that would be difficult to do. I would start talking to stakeholders and see if maybe a gradual migration would be possible. But my biggest advice would be that this is a potential game changer and could benefit every company. Like talking from my own experience, this has enabled so much change and made us from like a company that took quite a while to adapt to like new technologies to like adopt new things to like in the group scenario that we talked about before. We are spearheading on all fronts when it comes to like implementation of new security features, when it comes to implementation of new technologies. Like for example, the platform single sign-on that I think came out this year, um, or end of last year.
Yeah,
So
it's still in public preview.
yeah, let's see.
Yeah, yet.
Yeah, we already have that on all end user devices,
Nice.
and people are loving it. That now with the MacBook, you can just seamlessly sign into all the Microsoft products, and yeah, people are loving it. And sum it up, start.
Yeah, I mean, I posted a poll on Twitter and LinkedIn asking, what people would, their plans are, looking ahead to 2030, which is like 5 years from now. What's your org, ultimate cloud vision? And 56% said fully cloud native, just like how you have achieved it. They want to get to that. Another 37% said they'll still have AD, but it'll be Entra ID first, and on-prem AD will be sort of like the secondary part of it. So, like when you just take that together, that's like more than 90, right? 93% have plans to like be in the cloud. With if they still have AD, it'll be more as a secondary, like a legacy workloads and things that they can't move. They would still keep there. There were others who said primarily AD and Entra ID as a secondary, where Entra ID is not the main thing. They would still master their groups and uses on-prem. That was just like 5%. And there was still like 2% that said they'll be like 100% on-prem AD and no
Oh,
Entra at all. I mean, there are industries which need to do, which might, need that. They have to keep in that way. And it was a lot like this is with about 670, like 700 odd people voting on it. So fairly a good chunk of them. So you've been like a trailblazer, helping, and coming on and sharing here. And we want to see, more of the large as they, it's going to get complicated as the companies become bigger and when they move, like when you're talking about larger orgs and ones that have a whole history of, on-prem AD was stood up back in 2000s, and they had to migrate those. There'll be a lot of complications there when it comes to that. But it's something, I think the lesson, if I would take away from you, is to start today, right? A lot of the things you can already start planning and putting those things in place. And Yusuke, you have a lot of things coming up as well, right? In your goodie bag on helping others do the same thing.
Yes, lots of guidance is going to be published. Some of the engineering work is happening in
Right.
Microsoft. Stay tuned for those announcements.
Nice. Yes, keep an eye out. And yeah, there'll be lots of changes as well, right, to enable various scenarios and how we can move across. Cool. Thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating talk, and I'm sure the folks are going to love listening to it. And I'm sure lots of folks learned quite a lot in this session. So thank you for coming on, Tobias, and Yusuke. Thank you so much for joining in as well.
Thank you for having me as well.
Thank you, Tobias. Thank you, Meryl.